AI behaves like a gas. It fills any container that you put it in.
I mean, even my 3-year-old can pick up sometimes, like when I'm getting a little frustrated with them, how are you feeling? So AI doesn't even have all of that information right now. Consciousness is understanding oneself, and then theory of mind really builds on top of that, is understanding oneself and then understanding someone else. But can you really have that if you can't even detect when you're wrong, when you don't know what you're talking about? So how could you detect that in someone else?
Hi, everybody. I'm here with Dr. Sarah Walsh. She authored a book chapter about AI theory of mind. And I'm very excited to get into some details about that topic with her today. Hi, Sarah.
Hi, Alex. Thanks for having me. I'm really excited to be here.
As am I. So I've read this chapter you wrote. I think it's extremely interesting in exploring from a scientific perspective what the theory of mind means in the age of AI and how that can be used for AI to have more interactive conversations, more effective conversations with the users. I think one thing that we should start with is I have an interest in this because I've been writing some AI newsletters related to psychology. And primarily, I'm interested in how things that we know about human psychology apply to the way that AI behaves, the way that AI inherits some human behaviors. So I think that's part of why I'm interested in this topic. And I think maybe the first step is to talk about theory of mind in a very layman's terms framework.
Yeah. Yeah, sounds good. That is also why I'm interested in this topic. So I've been researching in this space kind of the intersection of human factors, which is very engineering and psychology based, and then AI. So, a lot of how humans understand AI systems, how AI systems can understand humans, and how they can collaborate on tasks a lot more effectively. And so theory of mind is one of those concepts that, right, we've borrowed from psychology to pull in and say, can we take parts of how humans understand each other and extend that into how humans understand AI and how AI understands humans? So, like you said, let's start with the definition here. So theory of mind is the ability for humans to understand that other people, so people different from themselves, have beliefs, desires, intentions, and we use that understanding to interpret and infer things from their behavior and then predict behavior in the future. So you can see, obviously, why that would be very useful for AI to have for humans, right? To understand not just what they're saying, but what the underlying intent is, to be able to pull in other context and kind of get a better understanding for how to predict and how to be more useful as a collaborator, because ultimately theory of mind is kind of the foundation for everything that humans do socially. It's the foundation for empathy, for communication and cooperation, also for deception, which is very interesting. And that's a lot of the ways how we test theory of mind for teaching as well.
Yeah. So is it fair to say that, for example, right now we're having this conversation, I have a theory of mind about you automatic, like it's like a tiny little box in my head that gets filled with information about what is going on through your head. And this collection of information is helping me interact more effectively with you. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, that is exactly fair to say, right? That you have this understanding of what I know, and right, you're going to try and ask questions to get me to talk about those things. And there's also, always the anxiety part of being an expert on something, is that my theory of mind of you and your theory of mind of me, so that recursive part of it, right? Like a second order theory of mind, that I'm like, what if he thinks I know something that I don't? And
Right.
ask a question there, right? So neurotypical humans form that pretty automatically after about the age of 4. And before that, humans don't really have a great concept of other people think different things than I think, right? But humans start to be able to pass those false belief tasks of understanding that you think something based on your understanding of the world, and I think something based on my understanding of the world after that age.
Right. Understood. In fact, since you mentioned the age at which humans start to build theory of mind, one of the things that I found very effective in terms of understanding theory of mind from the chapter you wrote was this Sally Ann example. Would you just quickly play that out if you have it top of mind? Otherwise,
yeah. So Sally Ann task is a false belief task that, I've brought up that concept a couple of times, but it is like the kind of quintessential test for if someone has developed theory of mind where Sally and Anne are both in a room. Sally has a ball. She puts it in a basket or a box, whatever, and then leaves the room. Then Anne takes the ball and moves it to another location. And then Sally comes back, and the observer, the person who is being asked the questions, where will Sally look for the ball? Right. And when you have a theory of mind, you know that Sally will look where she last placed the ball. That is her understanding of where the ball is. But before you have a theory of mind, you'll know that, like, I observed that the ball was moved. And even though Sally wasn't in the room, Sally must know because I know. And so Sally will look here for the ball. And that task, it's not just, something used in psychology decades ago. It is still used for us understanding if AI has theory of mind, right? That we will try and use false belief tasks that are just small perturbations on the Sally Ann task to understand if AI has any sort of theory of mind, or if they're just doing pattern recognition, right? Because they have all this history on the Sally Ann task. If you ask ChatGPT to describe the Sally Ann task, they would. So can they genuinely understand false beliefs, or are they just pattern matching and using that from their training set?
Yeah, that makes sense. Thank you for that explanation. So as you were describing that, something occurred to me. I've noticed for myself that when I develop the understanding I have over a particular topic, a particular area of knowledge, I feel that my understanding is becoming more refined, more detailed. I can break down that knowledge a bit better into more details. So when you were describing the Sally Ann test, I was thinking of a child that initially starts with their own beliefs and sort of assumes that everybody has it's sort of like a unified theory of mind, right? And then over time they realize, oh no, those are actually different things, what I believe and what somebody else believes, right? It's a refinement of their knowledge in that particular aspect of life.
Yeah, it definitely is. And we get better at it over time, right? We get more reps. Like, it's not just that they think something different, but like also starting to understand deceptions and like intent behind those. It's not just like that they move the ball, it's why is Anne trying to steal Sally's ball?
Right.
There's so many layers to it. Exactly. It is really interesting, and it's really interesting to think how humans go down in those layers and how humans go down in those layers, say, with an AI. Like, when we can't, it's a black box. Like, a lot of times we don't totally know where those reasonings are coming from, and the motivations are so different from humans.
Right. Yeah, exactly. It's true. It's quite different. But this is a good segue because you mentioned intent. I think that it's a good segue into the topic of how good is AI's theory of mind when it comes to us. And I'm especially interested in the user perspective because I think there's a lot to be said here. But ultimately, I think the end users just use the Claude app, for example, right? So they don't understand everything that goes on behind the scenes. I think the average user just interacts with AI and is happy when the AI acts in the way they expect and is disappointed when the AI falls short of those expectations. So I think in many ways, AI has significantly improved, at least simulating the theory of mind. Whether it has one or not, I guess that's a more difficult topic. And what I've noticed is that there are a lot of factors that go into how close to perfection its understanding is of the user. One of the major factors I'd say, is the AI product or AI model's ability to understand context. So for example, if we've had a longer conversation and at some point I said something, but several turns later, the AI does something which sort of goes contrary to what I said at the beginning, it feels like it's sort of losing track of details. That's not necessarily a question. These are my just observations. I'm wondering.
They're good observations, honestly.
Okay.
Yeah, no, they're a lot of the same observations that I have had, and even as someone who researches in this space. So I think about the, problems in this same way, that I get frustrated when I'm like, is this past the context window? Why do you not? The initial prompt was very important. Let's keep the initial prompt regardless of whatever else you're collapsing. And people tend to be, obviously not every social interaction goes super well, and sometimes there's awkwardness in a social interaction as well, but people tend to be a little bit more forgiving in those types of interactions than we are with AI. And you did point out, which I also have to say, like, there's a lot of debate on if AI can have theory of mind, but AI, especially with large language models, has gotten at least really impressive with exhibiting theory of mind like behaviors. And so that's kind of where I will say it is at least simulating something similar to it. There are papers that are going to argue that theory of mind has spontaneously emerged, and there are also papers that are going to say, why are we even talking about this? AI doesn't have a mind. So we can't have a theory of mind for something that doesn't have a mind. Yeah, sorry. I'll let you get back to actually asking a question. I'm glad to hear that you also are thinking about it in the same way that I am.
Yeah, I think that's actually a key aspect of the phenomenon of AI interaction. The fact that whether, there's another big debate is whether AI can be conscious or not, and it's an interesting debate. I think that strictly speaking, that's not possible. I mean, it's not that I wouldn't want AI to be conscious or anything like that. I just think that large language model by themselves simply can't do that because they're optimized to generate tokens. That's it. They're not optimized to self-reflect. And except in looking at the previous conversation and the other answers they produced. But that's not introspection necessarily. It's just looking at previous tokens and generating more tokens. That's not to say I don't want to minimize in any way the experience of interacting with AI. I think it can be very rewarding in more aspects than just information gathering or challenging one's beliefs. All that said, whether it's conscious or not, I think it's a more interesting question whether the user thinks that the AI is conscious. And I think it's the same thing for whether AI has an ego or not, or whether AI has theory of mind or not. Can it simulate it? That's what I've been thinking about, and I've part of the thing that I touch on in newsletters and discuss. It feels to me that when it comes to meaning, AI behaves like a gas. It fills any container that you put it in. So, for example, if you give an AI the right structure, it will fill it with maybe not the perfectly right details, but fairly good details. Like if you give it the structure of a business plan, it can fill in each section and so on. And so I wonder if you gave it a really good structure for a theory of mind container, something that looks like the box in our heads, which we don't really know what that looks like, but if we were to model something like that intentionally, then maybe AI could fill in the blanks from the conversations it's having with a user.
Yeah, I think kind of what you're getting at here, and tell me if I'm off base, but kind of the difference between these data-driven models, which is like, right, large language models just kind of picking up the patterns in how we speak and then simulating it back to us, right? We're like pretty far past like, is AI passing a Turing test, and into like, okay, are we actually feeling like we're talking to a human even though we know that we're not? And then the second part of that is like the model-based approaches, right? Where what you're saying, like building that frame and then like having it fill it in, which researchers are doing. Not me personally, but researchers are doing that, right? Building that frame. Part of the complexity of building that frame for theory of mind is that it often is very like domain dependent. So you shift that frame a little bit and all of a sudden like it can't fill it again. So it just needs to be trained on something like so specific, or that frame needs to be built around something really specific. So like say you want an AI to give recommendations for medical decisions, right? Like the way that you would design theory of mind for that would have to be very specific of understanding mental states and how stress is like continually changing throughout, the interactions that are going on in an emergency room or something. And that would be like very different to how most of us use AI in like an office job, and the theory of mind that is required there. And I guess part of the reason that we say humans have it and AI is simulating it is that humans are good at novel concepts like that, moving this into a completely different domain and still understanding that people behave a certain way. People in different cultures will behave a certain way, even if we don't understand their culture. And building that frame it's so not straight that I guess it's hard to build it. It's this like nebulous cloud that is really hard to put an AI in, right? When it's a gas itself.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Yeah. It's almost like you need an AI to build the structure and another AI to fill it, kind of.
Yeah, right. Maybe that's it. We need multiple layers of the building.
Right. Yeah, and you're absolutely right. Most of the time when I work on an AI product, I'm working on a specific use case. And so in that case, it's less useful to build a complete theory of mind. It's more about understanding the intent of the user in a specific context. If your goal is to help the user understand a product and help them make a purchase that they're happy with, then there's not a lot of use in understanding how the user feels about their health or what they think about politics or anything else like that, right? It's a very limited data set that you need to work with. But I think that to really build a theory of mind of the user, which is really well encompassing of their personality and their state of mind, I think that's a lot more challenging.
It definitely is very challenging. And also when you're building something for a specific domain, there's some underlying understood intent, right? Like if you're building an AI shopping assistant, like someone's coming there to shop. That's the
Right.
underlying intent. So you're helping them with like this thing that you already know versus something that is more like a generalizable AI where people are coming for a lot of different reasons, right? And a lot of different, like some of them are task oriented, some of them, are like just play oriented, right?
Right.
So yeah, it is a very different, more difficult thing when we're talking about generalizing across, all applications of AI.
Right. Yeah, that's right. One quote from your paper that I found very important is a very simple statement, which is understanding others' mental states is fundamental to providing effective assistance. That was from the section in human to human interaction, but I think it very much applies to AI human interaction as well.
Yeah, I think it definitely does. I think that it's so relevant, right, to understand a lot of the things both about your cognition, right, and your affect. And there's so many ways that people are doing that that AI doesn't even have access to right now, right? And
Right.
we're kind of expecting them to behave human-like. I mean, a lot of us are, right? We shouldn't necessarily be, but that is kind of the expectation and like the, I guess, baseline that we're holding them against is to behave like a human when they don't have a lot of the context to understand a mental state, right? Like you're, say, working with Claude Code or something, and maybe it can pick up frustration when you're, constantly stopping it, or you're like, no, that wasn't right at all. But when you're actually in an interaction with someone, there's so many other things about like, they take a deep breath, they wrinkle their face, or like you can tell in a way that like you're doing something wrong and will stop. Or I mean, even my 3-year-old can pick up sometimes, like when I'm getting a little frustrated, how are you feeling? So like, that AI doesn't even have all of that information right now. And it's not to say that AI companies are not, privacy concerns aside, working on those things,
Right.
right? They definitely are. I think pretty much every mega tech corporation is. And OpenAI, there's been some news coming out that they're working on like a necklace or a pin or something with a camera. So like they will have more of that context, but also all of those things are outward facing, which I think is very interesting, right? They're not facing
Okay,
the user.
right.
um,
Yeah.
yeah.
It's certainly an interesting next frontier for building the next generation of AI products. I'm very interested in the idea of having a general purpose AI that actually does understand you and your personality and your interests. I know that recently, certainly each of the big AI products has now has memories. It has the ability to cross-reference conversations and extract relevant contextual data. But it would be nice if instead of doing that when you ask them to, it would be able to sort of have a cogent model of what that specific user cares about. And then the outward facing cameras will be helpful in the sense that when you're, let's say, seeing something that you may find interesting, I can tell you, hey, by the way, I know you love butterflies. There's a butterfly right now that you can see if you look to your right, and it's a very interesting species. And may not surface that information for another user.
Yeah, and much more like companionship than task oriented, which is an interesting way to think about AI. Also, because people are using it like that, right? Like, I think actually you had one of your newsletters about it, that people are using AI for companionship. So that is a very interesting use case. And as you're saying, like it is outward facing and collecting context, right? So even if it's not facing you to see that you're stressed, like maybe it can tell if it's a stressful environment,
Right.
things like that.
Yeah. And I think the other major direction for this conversation is what is our theory of mind about AI? And how do we get right or get wrong the notion of what AI knows and what it's capable of doing? For example, earlier when I was talking about how the experience as a user can vary a lot based on which model is being used or how much information you're giving it, I think that's part of what my theory of mind about AI has started to include, these caveats about if I keep going in a conversation for very long, it'll eventually start to forget details from the beginning. And if I use a less capable model, it'll make mistakes even sooner. But what is your take on that?
Yeah, I think that that is kind of a very interesting shift, right? From taking my mind as like someone who studied this like in theory and then as a practitioner, right? Someone who is using Claude like every day for different tasks and how I manage context, how I create prompts, right? I think a lot of people that regularly use AI have like some sort of master prompt that they have like describing how they expect it to interact, right? And that is us both having some sort of theory of mind about how it's been interacting and saying, these are the things that I want you to have a theory of mind about me. This is, I don't want verbose answers. I want you to show reasoning, right? And we can put on those settings or deciding whether you want to manually manage your context or have it automatically start managing it. And I actually have tried both ways and really prefer to do it manually because it gives me a much better theory of mind about what it still is understanding and keeping in context. And I can create like stop points in like this was a subtask in something that I was working on and have created my own ways of trying to have it maintain the theory of mind that I want. So I'll ask it when I'm at the bottom of one of those tasks, like, can you summarize the things that you think, and me saying it thinks that you think are important from what we just did. And it will summarize those. I will add on anything else that I want. And then I will save that summary after I do a compact and give it back. Like, these are the things that we were working on. These are the things to still hold in this conversation. Now let's get to, task 4C
Right.
on what we're working on. So yeah, I think people are developing their own theory of mind about how it's working, even though it's kind of I'm going to say a black box. It gives us some reasoning if we want it to, but I'm not sure if it's simulating reasoning or if that's based in actually how it's reasoning or just makes us feel better. But yeah.
I understand what you mean. Yeah. I think that's a great idea. I haven't thought of that before. Sort of manually managing the context during a compact in that particular way. I think that's a very cool approach. I'm gonna give that a try.
Yeah, well, it works for me, but I'm sure that there are a lot of things like everyone's, because it's so new, kind of figuring out their own ways to manage what the AI knows. And I mean, that is, I guess, where we're having this theory of mind about AI in the wild, right? It's all different. And you probably have a very different perspective because you've actually worked in this space a lot more of like AI development side of it, of stuff that I don't understand the inner workings. And so I'm like coming up with some of the cushion around it to make sure that it understands the things that I want.
Right. Yeah. I think, one insight that I've obtained by simply working with AI is that, at least that's my observation, may not be entirely accurate, but I feel that LLMs are overwhelmingly trained to optimize for providing a helpful response. Like it is their biggest imperative. And in certain circumstances, they also have a bias towards quick action, and it's pretty strong. And the reason I'm saying that is that I feel that somehow goes against the idea of, hey, let's figure out, it's sort of contradictory to, hey, let's figure out what is the user's frame theory, what is their mind? What are they thinking about? What do they care about? What is their intent? And let's think of that in detail. And then let's think about how to provide the response that gives them exactly what they want, no superfluous information, if the entire response loop from AI included all these different elements, it would probably take a lot longer to respond. And so in the interest of providing a quicker response, I think that sometimes AI cuts corners on details. Yeah, that's part of what I am optimizing for in my understanding of AI.
Yeah, I guess I've kind of noticed some of the same things, right? It's giving a response, and this is not going to sound like I'm an academic when I say this, but in a Reddit thread, someone described that, people feel like AI is giving the best response to a question, and what they're giving, or LLMs are giving, is this is what a response sounds like to that question, even if it's not correct, right? You've come up with your ways to kind of work around that, or at least understand where those shortcomings are. But I don't think that most of the general population has a great understanding of where those shortcomings are, or even like sometimes how to look into what the truth is, because you can ask, ChatGPT to give you some kind of information. Like one example that I saw was someone saying, "Is there high fructose corn syrup in baby formula?" And it's, yes, there is. But the person prompting it was an expert. They were like, "Do you know that high fructose corn syrup and corn syrup are not the same thing?" And then it backtracked, and it was like, "Oh, yes, there's corn syrup, not high fructose corn syrup in baby formula. And like, these are the reasons why." But people trust it, right? Like, people trust it. People have a theory of mind that like this thing has all human knowledge. And so it must be right. And it doesn't have an intent to deceive me. So why would it? But it gives answers that sound like answers.
Yeah, that's true. I think one other thing that AI is trained with, and I don't necessarily know if this is intentional or just a side effect of the reinforcement learning with human feedback that they go through. I feel like all the responses from AI are by default very confident. And I think that users respond to that very well, right? To believe that, hey, they
Yeah.
really know what it's talking about. Yeah, yeah.
And they do with people too, right? You can seem like an expert by saying something very confidently, but that creates a really brittle trust too. That then AI gets something wrong and they say it really confidently, and you're like, this thing doesn't work.
Right.
And one approach that I have taken, but maybe should be taken at the level of designing AI, is that I do in my high level prompt say, I don't want you to make any assumptions about what I want. If you feel like I didn't prompt it clearly, ask me questions about it. And I do find that to be pretty effective. And that is something that I did in Claude Code. And I don't have a good mental model of how that relates back to using it in the web browser. But I've noticed that it started prompting me with questions in the web browser as well. And I was like, is this because I asked it to, or is this a change that they made in the model? So
Yeah.
maybe
Yeah, I think I've noticed that too. My strategy is, so aside from my general prompt, whenever I give it like kind of a longer prompt about, hey, let's build this big feature or this module and whatever I'm working on, at the end of the prompt, I add, let me know what questions you have, to kind of remind it in the moment that this is a good point to ask me questions. But I did notice recently that at least Claude has started to ask questions by default. So I think that there is something that has changed in their training. I think that this strategy of asking the AI to ask you questions has become popular, and probably Anthropic noticed that. And so they specifically wanted to try that to counter some of the very confident responses that AI gives, maybe.
Well, I hope so, because those confident responses can be very, very misleading. And there's a lot of research on how people understand systems, like create mental models around technology that is super simple, right? Like, I don't know if you're familiar with any of Don Norman's work on like the design of everyday things, but he describes like people's functional mental models of a calculator and how wrong those often are, right? That like a lot of people, they don't have a good understanding of like how the calculator actually works. So they'll hit clear a bunch of times, like because they've been burned once on like it remembering something and like getting the wrong thing. And to go from like our incorrect mental models of a calculator to like these folk theories of AI and how it's built, like of course we're going to be wrong, and it gives confident answers, and so we're going to feel confident in it. That actually was like a lot of the core of my research is, do people understand when to override AI? If they're trained to be an expert on something, right? But I mean, most it used to be we were always like training for the experts in the situation, but now it's like training for everybody, like complete novices feeling like experts. But do they have a great understanding of like where AI's knowledge base is and what things it gets right, and what things it gets really wrong? And still, large language models are not always great at like logic problems. Uh, and even like simple things like cryptograms and like things like that I've tried because I like doing those for fun.
Yeah.
Just seeing if it can, figure out the cipher.
Right.
And it's not great at that.
Yeah. No, that's true. One of my hobbies is learning foreign languages. And so it turns out that you also have to practice them after you learn them because otherwise you start to forget. So recently I've been practicing my French a bit. And so I'm talking to Claude in French. And sometimes it will respond, it will say, hey, actually, you said this thing, but it's spelled like this, And one time it corrected me, and its correction was exactly the way that I spelled it. And it gave me like some notes about it needs to have blah blah and blah blah, but those things were already there. And so I said, what do you mean? Like that's what I did. And then it apologized for getting it wrong. And so the conclusion I drew from that was there are certain domains where it's not great. And I think foreign languages is one of those domains. It probably depends on the amount of training it has on that specific domain. But that is a bit like logic, right? Because languages have rules. And so when
and fuzzy rules.
Yeah, fuzzy rules, exactly. Yeah. So like it's easy to get those confused even when you're a person, let alone an AI. Yeah. So
yeah, definitely. One thing that I have found help, but it's so hard because right, like the things that are helpful with one model will like change with the next one on like how to correct for things. But I got from Lenny's podcast, they had an episode on how to prompt better, and like how to get better solutions as well. And so asking it to constantly critique itself, like never take its first answer, kind of, like a business deal. Don't take the first offer. Ask it to critique itself and say where it might be wrong. And I'm not sure that it's good at it, right? I'm part of like the consciousness is understanding oneself, and then theory of mind really builds on top of that is understanding oneself and then understanding someone else. But can you really have that if you can't even detect when you're wrong? When 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 you don't know what you're talking about. So how could you detect that in someone else?
That's true. Yeah, that's a good point. I wonder, the last section of the chapter you wrote was talking about the mutual theory of mind and shared mental models. I feel like that's maybe even more applicable when it comes to interacting with AI, because in a sense, you have a better theory of mind about your own mind and about the AI than it does about either. And in giving it these big prompts, telling it how to behave and what you care about, you're encoding part of that knowledge to give it a tool. So it's almost like you're managing both of those theory of mind. Yeah.
Yeah, that is interesting, right? And that's different from how you would have mutual theory of mind with a person that you're not managing their theory of mind. I mean, you might try to, but I mean, oftentimes it would actually kind of detract, and maybe it's doing that with AI as well. Let me just real quick say mutual theory of mind is when, we have this simultaneous, both sides, you and the AI are having this, or you and another person. And I also want to shout out my co-author, Chelsea Wang, because like, this is the crux of her research. She also did her PhD at Georgia Tech. She's a postdoc at CMU right now. But the research that we have in the chapter on this is like her original research. So yeah, she kind of built these 3 stages of mutual theory of mind, where the AI is interpreting your needs, and then you are recognizing what the AI understood about that, and then the AI is making updates, right? So it is that constant feedback loop. And I think that can get kind of complicated in the way how we're using AI in chats, in conversations, in a folder, wherever like we're using it. And then we feel like, okay, I have made all these updates to Claude or, to Opus 4.6, and now it should know these things about me. And it like knows it for that conversation, or it knows it like in that spot. And then all of that collapses. So yeah, having that kind of broader way to manage it. And I think that even gets more important as we're talking about AI working more agentically for humans, right? That like how can you trust it to go off and do something when you feel like you constantly have to manage it? And that if it gets the wrong intent, like you've just lost, 2 hours of it going off and doing something and coming back and doing the wrong thing.
Right. Yeah, that's true. I think that's actually the hardest obstacle that I ran into in my journey as an AI assisted engineer is just having the trust that we're at a point where I can just say, go and implement this on your own, and I don't need to watch it or whatever. And it's, it's getting close, but I'm not quite hands off just yet.
Yeah, no, me either. And I think it takes a lot of, like you're saying, trust and a lot of practice to feel like you are sending it off right. It's like being a manager all of the sudden of like a team instead of just being the IC on the team, is that you need to bring in all of the context like in the beginning so that you don't have an employee go off for, a couple months, now a couple hours, and then come back to you with like, here's the thing you asked for. And it's like, man, you missed the mark.
That's right.
And it's a skill and that we're all just building in real time.
Yeah. So is there anything else that maybe we didn't cover about AI and theory of mind that you feel is worth mentioning?
I do just feel like it's changing and improving so fast. I don't know the turnaround time on a podcast, but I almost feel like, that chapter was published, I think 2025. And so we wrote it about a year before that because it takes a while to, for anyone not familiar with the academic writing process, it takes a little while. And so even, rereading it now, and like some of these things almost feel like out of date, which is crazy to think that something that was just recently published is out of date. And reading back on, there's an article in Nature talking about AI theory of mind and all the tests that they did, that reading it now you're like, oh, well, that's using like ChatGPT 4. I mean, is that really relevant to what it looks like now? So while I don't think theory of mind is spontaneously emerging, I do think that it has to be engineered intentionally. And I don't even know if we want it to spontaneously emerge. I think that anyone who says like, that's impossible, we're so far away from it, I would just say that, things that seemed like sci-fi or design theory a few years ago are like now implemented in Copilot and Cowork and Claude Code. Like things are changing and improving so fast. So I am interested to see what capabilities we engineer AI for next.
Yeah. Well, let me ask you a couple of off-topic questions, if that's okay. So what do you feel is maybe the biggest limitation of AI right now, or the thing that you like the least about AI that'll work too?
Okay. I mean, I think for me, the thing that I like least is the privacy concerns that I have for it, right? Like, and I have tried to get some answers from Anthropic, and I think like the organization that I work for is maybe not big enough to warrant a lot of care, but not small either, like just under like 500 employees. And I'm like, hey, like we work with PHI, and how can we make sure, like right now I can't use it with actual data, like I either have to create synthetic like 5 lines or something, this is what the data looks like, or just providing some metadata, and then having like scripts created. But I think actually being able to trust it and trust the security and privacy for the interactions that we're having, right? And I mean, so much so that we're not even sure if we can connect our Notion page to the knowledge base because there's employee information on there, which is, it's stuff outside of our database, but it's still important that we are protecting PII, so of the employees. So I guess as the person kind of pushing for some of this at my organization, and then like also feeling all of the responsibility of data compliance, that it's murky unless you sign like a HIPAA BAA, which they only will do for companies that have plans over $100,000 a year, which like is really prohibitive for a lot of, nonprofits, which I'm at, or other smaller organizations, startups, to work with sensitive data. So I guess I would say that that's my least favorite thing right now. What's yours?
I think that's a big one. Use just the certainty around privacy for data. I think that's a really big and nuanced topic with a lot of different aspects. And I think a close second is the AI's, the LM's inability to stick to the guidelines that you give it without forgetting them. I think that's pretty close. Yeah.
I have to be like pretty careful sometimes that I will like tell it like maybe you can tell me if I'm doing this wrong, but like in the prompt or like at the when I initialized Claude and like you don't have access to files like outside of this, and it will ask me all the time like when it's like hey, do you approve these actions, like there will be like bash commands to access files, or I'm like, no, I said you can only operate in this file. Like you have to be pretty careful with it, that it's like I think we need those files, and I know you want those files. I know we're referring to those files in the code, but we are not pulling them into this file.
Right. Yeah, that's a very good point. Sometimes that happens, and I do the same thing. Like, I also see it as, not giving it access to context that it doesn't need, because then it will just give it more info that it needs to manage, right? More probably that it'll forget details. So yeah.
Yeah, you don't need to know that. This is sort of a need to know operation.
That's right. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. I wanted to also kind of swing in the completely opposite direction and say, what is sort of pie in the sky kind of thing? What would be a feature or a use case for AI that you would be really excited for in the future?
I feel like because I come at it from a perspective of human factors and how people will inevitably use it wrong, I don't know that I have like a hard, like I'm so excited to see it used in this, but I think that there's just so much opportunity in healthcare for AI to be used. Like there's so many diagnoses that are rare, and so of course like humans are not going to be able to keep all of those in their head, but AI being able to take all of the context around the patient and come up with some sort of like recommendations, decision support systems, which it is being used for, right? Like this isn't like novel, it is actually being used for that. I think has a lot of benefits for humanity, and our healthcare system is outside of the context of the scope of this conversation. But, I think it's something that we could really use as long as ethics isn't an afterthought in that, right? Like, because if people are going to sort of blindly follow recommendations and then like, who's liable when we know that that is something humans do, that they blindly follow recommendations? So is it on the companies? Is it on like hospitals that are forcing doctors to use this? Or is it on the doctor who's supposed to ultimately be the decision maker? I guess like more for people, that's like the use case that I'm excited about for myself. I am really excited just about using it in my everyday life, right? Like Claude Code has been awesome and has really accelerated the work that I'm doing and allowed me to go a lot farther and deeper into work because I'm not manually coding every single line. And I think that that can get even better with cowork. And if you've been using any of like Claude's skills that create PowerPoints and stuff, like it does just speed up the workflow so much that I don't have to spend time on a lot of the administrative tasks and can actually do the tasks that require like higher level thought, and focus more on like what things am I working on that will create impact. Yeah, I'm excited for continued advancements there because I'm sure if you've been using those, that I'm not perfect.
For sure, yeah. I'm excited about Claude offering design now. I was quite thrilled that they added that feature. Do you know about that?
I don't know about that, no.
Yeah, it's a relatively recent feature. So now there's a section of the Claude app that you can use for app design. So sort of, you drop, let's say this is what my app looks like, redesign it, or just from scratch design, an app that does this, and it gives you screenshots, that you can then use. You can take those screenshots and then give them to Claude Code and say, look at this, build me the interface that looks like this.
Oh, I love that. Well, that will definitely be something that I will use going forward. I wish it was something that I had like 6 months ago as I was like designing the UI for some of the apps. But I mean, I'm going to continue doing that. So I'm definitely going to ask for suggestions on, some wireframes. Hey, what do you think? Make this better.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I can put together a functional design, but nothing that's extraordinary. So yeah, having a helper in that particular situation is great.
Yeah, I feel like I know just enough to kind of be dangerous in some of the design aspects, which maybe AI does too. But so that's I guess a good note. But yeah, no, I'm really excited to use it, and that is one of the contexts that I really feel like AI is good for, right? When you can create something and then ask for tweaks rather than using it to do all of that like thought generation kind of parts for you.
Yeah, that's right. All right. Any shout outs that you'd like to give?
Yeah, definitely. So we talked about this book chapter. My co-authors, Chelsea Wang and Lance Yang, could not have done it without them. Like, they were huge in this. They are continuing to work in this space. So, please go read their papers. They are both brilliant. Yeah, I also want to thank Wei, the editor of the Handbook for Human-Centered AI, who asked me to write this. And then I kind of bridged into this space from Chelsea's advisor, Ashok Goel. He got me into the workshop creation for Kai on theory of mind in AI. And we had like great conversations, worked with a lot of great people in this space at IBM and Google. So a lot of these ideas are not just, my own. This chapter is really just kind of a lit review on the work that a lot of brilliant people are doing. So everyone that we cited in this, also thank you. And Alex, thank you for asking me to be on here.
Of course. It was my pleasure. Thanks for joining us today, Sarah. It was great talking to you.
Yeah, you as well.